Listener discretion is advised, as details of how the victims were murdered will be shared. Two of the victims were 9-year-old children. If you are sensitive to any of these topics, you may want to skip this video. Welcome to part 2 of Two Houses with Two Murders. This next tale takes place in a house on 9337 Columbia Boulevard in Silver Spring, Maryland. The first incident took place on August 6, 2002, when a frantic man called 911 at 11:23 p.m. screaming for help. Gunshots could be heard before the caller stopped communicating. The victims were 9-year-old Ericka Smith and her father, 47-year-old George Gregory Russell, who went by Greg, so that is how I will refer to him. Ericka's mother, Carol Smith, had known Greg for 2 decades, and Ericka was the only child the two of them had with each other. Ericka lived with her mother, but often stayed with her father. He was supposed to take her to an orthodontist appointment the next day, but when they didn't show up for the appointment, the office called Carol, who was at work. Carol was called into the HR office and greeted by two police detectives who gave her the news about Ericka and Greg. The night of August 6, 2002, at around 10:30 p.m., Ericka had been on the phone with her maternal grandmother. Ericka told her that she and her father had gone for a bike ride earlier that day, then told her grandmother good night. Around 11 p.m., Greg was on the phone with a female friend who could hear Ericka giggling in the background. Greg and Ericka were unaware of the danger that was lurking in the backyard, where the killer disguised himself with a wig and fake beard. The police investigated the crime scene, found fibers from the wig and beard along with the package that the items came in the backyard. The killer entered the home by cutting a hole in the kitchen door screen and let himself in. He was armed with a stolen gun. Fibers from the wig and beard were also found in the kitchen. I am once again going to warn you because these details are horrific. Listener discretion is advised. You might want to fast forward 2 to 3 minutes if you are sensitive to a murder involving a child. Ericka was the first person the killer encountered. She called out to her father. Greg was still on the phone with his friend, who heard Ericka shout, "Daddy, Daddy!" Then Greg shouted, "Ericka!" and the line disconnected. Greg was shot 8 times in the arms, legs, and chest. Ericka had been beaten in the face and head, which knocked her to the ground, and was shot once in the back of the neck, just above her shoulder. The bullet came from above and traveled through her body, piercing her heart and out of her body, leaving a divot in the floor. Police arrived on the scene and were in the front yard. They did not have time to surround the house when they heard gunshots. They approached the front door and called out, but when they got no response, they kicked the door in. Upon entering the home, they found Greg Russell lying on an upstairs landing. He was bleeding heavily and gasping for air. He was able to give a description to police of a large black man with bushy hair and a beard. He said the killer robbed him of $3 and a Bible. Greg was also asking the police about his daughter, which prompted them to look for her. Ericka was found in her bedroom near the closet. She was already deceased. Greg was transported to the hospital where he passed away. A neighbor told police that at approximately 11:30, around the time the police had arrived, he saw a figure dressed in white sweatpants and black sneakers running past his window. The suspect was running towards a fence in the backyard. The police searched the area but did not find the suspect. Greg Russell worked in an accounting and real estate and had previously worked as a deputy for the Port Authority. He was very well known and prominent in the Baltimore area. He had 2 daughters, Ericka and another daughter with another woman. Ericka was going to be in 4th grade at private Potomac School in McLean. She loved to dance, read, and wrote several short stories. She also played the piano. The police had no leads immediately following the crime, so the killer was free when he committed his next heinous act. On August 9, 2002, just 3 days after the murders of Ericka and Greg, A 36-year-old lawyer, Katie Hill, from Seattle, Washington, was visiting the nation's capital to attend a fountain pen convention. She had dinner with friends and caught a train to take her back to the Tacoma metro station. She was walking toward her sister-in-law's house where she had been staying when she was robbed of her wallet, digital camera, Palm Pilot, credit cards, and a cell phone. She was shot in the head and another part of her body. Her body was found in the courtyard of the Tacoma Elementary School in Washington, D.C. Katie was married and working at Preston Gaines and Ellis, a law firm in Seattle. She was an advocate for foster children in family court. She collected fountain pens and wrote many loving letters with them. She collected antiques, was well-traveled, and loved to knit. On September 5, 2002, 39-year-old Anthony Quinton Kelly was charged with their murders. He had a long list of crimes dating back to 1982. He was recently paroled on March 7th of 2002 from a conviction from 1996 where he was charged with car theft and threatening two individuals with a deadly weapon. I have scoured the internet and the offender tracking systems, prisons, etc., and cannot find any photos of this scumbag, but I found many stories to list his long history of crimes. These crimes could have been prevented had Anthony's parole officer done his job correctly. While Anthony was on parole, he was working for $6.50 an hour doing groundskeeping job. When the parole officer would get updates from his employer, he was getting favorable updates. The parole officer was supposed to make in-person visits, and if he had done that, he would have realized that Anthony's stepfather was the person who claimed to be his employer, and his employment records were false. He had so many crimes once he was released, as stated, way too many to list, so I will list a few key crimes that should have got him sent back to prison before these murders occurred. June 10, 2002. Anthony was arrested in Prince George. He had stolen a car and assaulted a police officer. He was jailed, but because it was in a different county, his parole officer didn't get a notification. His stepfather posted $12,000 for bail. June 20, 2002. An urgent memo was sent to his parole officer alleging he kidnapped a 20-year-old female by knife point and forced her to drive her Cadillac to a wooded area where he assaulted her. However, he was not charged with the crime for several months and claimed that the sex was consensual. July 9, 2002. Almost a month after the assault on the police officer, the parole board ruled he should remain free until he was formally charged. July 30, 2002 was the date Anthony was supposed to appear in court regarding the theft of the automobile and the assault on the police officer in Prince George. When he failed to appear, a warrant was issued. The parole officer tried reaching Anthony by cell phone, but all the calls went unanswered. August 1, 2002, Anthony broke into a Kensington gun shop and stole 5 pistols. August 6, 2002, he murdered Greg and Ericka. August 9, 2002, he murdered Katie. August 20, 2002, Anthony took his wife and son out for pizza in a stolen Tahoe that had been linked to an attempted assault of another young woman. The police spotted the vehicle and attempted to pull him over. Anthony led the police on a high-speed chase before crashing into a utility pole. He took off on foot, leaving his wife and son behind. This prompted the police to get a search warrant of the apartment of his wife. During the search, they found a Bible inscribed to Greg Russell and Katie Hill's camera. They also found a wig and beard that matched fibers found at the crime scene of Ericka and Greg. 2 of the 5 stolen guns from the Kensington gun shop were found in the Tahoe. Ballistic tests showed one of the gun's bullets matched those used in all 3 slayings. August 21, 2002, D.C. police contacted Anthony's parole officer, saying he was wanted for murder. The parole officer didn't treat this matter as urgent. He drew up an arrest warrant and mailed it to the parole commission instead of faxing it. The warrant was received 6 days later. September 5th, 2002, a manhunt was underway for Anthony. His parole officer and his supervisor placed a call to Anthony's cell phone, and to their surprise, he picked up. They urged him to turn himself in, and he hung up on them. He was spotted later that night at College Park, Maryland, where they arrested him. In 2003, he was indicted by a grand jury and remained in prison. Before going to trial, he was evaluated for mental health and found unfit to stand trial. He remained in a mental health facility where he spent most of the next 4 years. In 2008, the judge ruled Anthony was fit to stand trial. He chose to represent himself, and that he did. He was relentless when questioning Carol Smith, Ericka's mother. He was found guilty and sentenced to life, but has filed many lawsuits against Maryland, the last one being in 2017. I am not sure if he died because he is not listed as an active inmate. I even checked to see if he was transferred to another state. If he did die, no one cared enough to memorialize him in an obituary. The next incident at the home on Columbia Boulevard in Silver Spring, Maryland, took place on April 15, 2010. The addition of shutters, a white front door, and a new garage door were added sometime before or during the next occupant's residency. This time, the victim was 42-year-old Brian Betts, who was a well-liked, openly gay principal at Shaw Middle School in Washington, D.C. He was adored by students and staff members. Brian purchased the home on August 27, 2003 for $324,000, a little over a year after the previous incident. He had no idea of its past until a neighbor told him. Once Brian learned of the home's history, he hired a lawyer and tried to get out from under the mortgage. But in Maryland, realtors do not have to disclose that information. Once he found out he was unable to get out from underneath the house, he decided to embrace it, and he had 2 ministers bless the house. He lived there peacefully for almost 7 years. On April 14, 2010, a neighbor said Brian hosted a barbecue in his backyard and had seen Brian outside as late as sometime between 11 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. Brian was on the phone with his sister until 10:50 p.m., then made a call to an unknown number about a half hour later. Around 12:50 a.m. on April 15th, a neighbor heard a car alarm go off and saw Brian's Nissan Xterra backing out of the driveway and turned down an alleyway. When Brian failed to show up for work on April 15, 2010, co-workers of Brian had been unable to reach him and went to check on him. The co-workers had gone to a neighbor's house to ask if they had seen Brian. The neighbor and co-workers all went to Brian's house and found the front door unlocked. I have read conflicting stories on what happened next, so I am not sure which is true. One version is that once it was discovered the door was unlocked, they decided not to enter and called the police. The other is that one co-worker did enter and found Brian and called the police. The police arrived at the home at 7:30 p.m. on April 15, 2010. There were no signs of forced entry. Police found Brian fully clothed and deceased in an upstairs bedroom. Brian died from a single gunshot wound that penetrated his lungs, heart, and spinal cord. On April 16th, the day after Brian's death, police located his Nissan Xterra 14 miles away from his home. It was undamaged and parked behind a children's ministry in southeast Washington, D.C. The morning of May 3, 2010, police had executed search warrants for 4 residents they believed to be connected to the crime. The first home was the home of 46-year-old woman named Miss Williams. She was arrested after surveillance cameras at Giant Food grocery store in Silver Spring recorded her using one of Brian's credit cards the day after his body was found. She was charged with 2 counts of knowingly receiving stolen credit card and with the intent to use it. Police were searching for her son, who was believed to be connected to the murder. The second location was an apartment in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Three 18-year-old males were arrested: Alonte Saunders and William's son Sharif Towell Lancaster. They were charged with first-degree murder, armed robbery, and the use of a handgun in a felony crime of violence. The third man was Deontre Gray, who lived at the Oxon Hill apartment. He was charged with murder, robbery, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Alonte Saunders and Sharif Lancaster had escaped on April 1, 2010 from a youth rehabilitation center just 2 weeks before Brian's murder. On May 18th, 19-year-old Joel Johnson was the fifth suspect to be arrested in connection to Brian Bett's murder. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of armed robbery, and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and 3 counts of armed robbery. The evidence against the suspects were as follows. Sharif Lancaster's fingerprints were found inside Brian Bett's home. Alonte Saunders' fingerprints were found outside Brian Bett's Nissan. Multiple surveillance cameras showed all 4 of the accused present while purchases were made with Brian's stolen credit cards. Items belonging to Brian were found in Deontre Gray's apartment. The police found Brian's wallet with a receipt in it for a pair of Nikes purchased with one of Brian's stolen credit cards. Brian's cell phone and the keys to his Nissan were also found. All the suspects pled guilty. The motive was robbery. Alonte Saunders had connected with Brian Betts on an online sex chat room. The intent was to hook up for an encounter, and Brian left his front door unlocked. Alonte, armed with a gun, entered the home and headed upstairs to the bedroom. Sharif, Joel, and Deontre all stayed downstairs and stole Brian's TV, iPad, and camera. As mentioned, Brian's wallet containing the credit cards and his vehicle were also stolen in addition to his life. Alonte claimed they were going to rob Brian and did not intend on killing him. He said when he encountered Brian in the bedroom, they struggled and the gun went off, accidentally killing Brian. The prison sentences were as follows. Alonte Saunders received 40 years for felony murder. He did not get life because the murder was not proven to be premeditated. They could only prove premeditated burglary without intent to murder. Deontre Gray was sentenced to 30 years for robbery and possessing a handgun. Sharif Lancaster was sentenced to 27 years for robbery and possessing a handgun. Miss Williams was sentenced to 18 months for knowingly using a stolen credit card. Joel Johnson ended up being sentenced to 18 months for accessory after the fact. He was released in spring of 2012. He obviously didn't learn his lesson because by September of that same year of his release, he and a friend forced their way into an apartment they intended to rob, and the occupant pulled out a gun and shot Joel Johnson dead. Brian's memorial was moved to a different venue to accommodate over 2,000 people who showed up for the service. Many students spoke of the impact Brian had on their lives. Some even went so far to compare him to more as a father figure. The school district praised Brian's work for transforming the school. He made the environment fun for the students, which made them want to learn, and the passing rate had increased under his leadership. He personally met with several of the students' families to introduce himself. He replaced teachers who were not teaching the students and increased the training that the teachers received. Brian's family would have liked to see the house bulldozed, but it was still owned by the bank. The house was listed for sale on March 31, 2011. The price changed multiple times and was delisted a couple times. The house finally sold on January 31, 2012 for $330,000, which was $6,000 more than Brian paid in 2003. Whoever bought it did it to flip it. The house interior was completely repainted, and other improvements were made in the living room, dining room, and kitchen. Exterior changes were made as well. The roof was gutted and fixed, the shutters were changed from green to black, and the front door was changed from white to red, and the front steps were painted gray. It was listed again 2 months later in March of 2012. The address changed from 9337 to 9335. The house sold in January of 2013, this time for $379,000. From January 2013 through July 2021, whoever bought the house lived there without incident. The house was relisted again for sale, and once again the interior completely repainted, the basement was finished, and the back porch stairs and awning were all stained. It also appeared in 2021 listing that there had been nicely landscaped front yard, although it doesn't look like the current owners kept up with that landscaping. As of 2024, the house last sold on November 29, 2021 for $565,000. In both parts 1 and 2, thieves set out to satisfy their greediness, but possessions didn't seem to be enough for them. The lives they stole were far more precious than any possessions. May all the victims be remembered and rest in peace. The story of Brian Betts had one more related casualty. It was that of his former boyfriend, O'Neal McGee. The two had met in Brian's hometown of Manassas, Virginia in 1990. They stayed together for over a decade before parting ways, but two remained close friends. O'Neal was also lured by somebody online. The story of O'Neal McGee is continued in the next video. Thank you for listening.